My name is Joe Peroni, and this is the Rise Above Project. And today we're going to talk about normalizing and accepting trauma as an essential element of a well-lived life. That's the first part. The second part, I want to talk about maybe giving some alternative options to the word trauma. I believe strongly that the word trauma in our society right now is being incredibly overused. It's to the point where we're expecting people to have trauma all the time. And if they don't have trauma, we think that there's something wrong with them, but maybe they have really great coping skills. Expecting everybody to have trauma can also be, in a sense, being overly judgmental, and I'll explain a little bit more what I mean by that later. But first, let's get a good working definition of the word trauma. So let's take this from the American Psychology Association. The emotional and physical response to a terrible event. It is the subjective experience of the individual that defines whether the event is traumatic or not. Trauma is the failure to recover from an event. It's not the event itself. So if we look at somebody who's traumatized, typically what we're going to see is that someone who's stuck. Where are they stuck? They're stuck in the past. So you'll see things like they'll be very hypervigilant because they're worried about some type of stressor or something that could hurt them. And that makes sense because of something that happened in the past. However, because they're stuck in the past, it makes it very difficult for them to see what's in front of them. For example, they see an individual in front of them, and there's this type of prejudice that they may have if they're traumatized because they're circling in their brain or ruminating about a past experience with a person who is like that. So they can become very suspicious, very mistrustful, very even on the side of paranoia. And so what happens is they're so rooted, or they've got one foot in the past, that they're not being able to be in the present, to see and to feel and to act appropriately in the present time. People who are traumatized also tend to have flashbacks. Now, this can be visual, it could be auditory, but when we're talking about complex post-traumatic stress disorder, we're also talking about flashbacks that are emotional. So if they hear a word, or if they hear a sentence, or someone says something, it could trigger something that happened in their past. So they could hear something that makes them feel a little diminished or put down or disrespected. And it may not be that, but it might be connected to something in their past. And so they react in the present time for something that happened in the past. And what happens when people are traumatized, they tend to have more of narrow minds. They can't see the big picture, or I should say that they have difficulty seeing the big picture of what is, instead of trying to factor in, and they try to put people in a box. Like I've seen people like this, and this is the way they are. All men are, all women are, all this. And it becomes very prejudicial in a sense. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but they feel that it keeps them safe. And sometimes they do this consciously, and a lot of times, or mostly, they do it unconsciously. But either way, it becomes that they're stuck. And that is, whatever the event was, that's where we could say that they're traumatized and they have experienced a trauma. Now, in going over the definition, there's a lot of things we can look at here that are really, really important as we start to break this open to say, listen, is everything a trauma? It doesn't have to be. So let's go with the major points of this definition. So number one, the individual themselves gets to decide how to react to the event. Okay, it's a decision. Number two, you get to decide if the event is traumatic or not. And the third, probably the most important part, is is that it is the subjective experience of the individual that's going to define if an event is traumatic or not. So here's where I get to give you an example. I was a young therapist at the time. Let's say inexperienced. I thought I was going to be doing grief counseling on this individual. She was an older lady, and I was getting ready I understood the situation. I thought I understood the situation, and I thought I was going to be doing grief counseling. And she had a long-term marriage, it was over 20 years, and her husband died. I thought, yeah, this is it, grief counseling, let's do this. Come to find out, she couldn't wait to talk to a therapist to unload all of the emotions and feelings she had for all these years, because she said that she was being verbally and physically abused for over 20 years. And this person was an upstanding person in the community, and she felt like she couldn't talk to anybody because nobody would believe her. And if they did listen to her, she was under the impression that they would deny it and say that the problem was her, or they wouldn't believe her. So she kept quiet for over 20 years. And she was thrilled to have a therapist so she could finally say her truth. And her truth is that she was thrilled. She was happy. She was excited that she could live her new life. So when we look at people and we go, your husband died, that's a traumatic experience. Not so fast. It's the subjective experience of the individual. So this person wanted to know how to get their life started again and how to start interacting socially with people and how to be romantic with others now. Like, it's not that. So you can't be judgmental and expect it because you might feel that way, or American society feels a certain way, that everybody feels that way, because it's not true. And as a therapist, I can tell you, I can almost feel the pressure, and I've seen it from other therapists, trying to put downward pressure on somebody like me who says, is it a trauma? No, I'm the compassionate one for saying that, or the empathetic one. You can't just assume that everything in the world is traumatic for everybody all the time. And it's subjective experience, so you can change that. You can treat people how to handle their activating events better, number one, and you can also prepare them for quote-unquote traumatic events. This can happen. Good therapists should know this. So let's continue, because I'm going to try to change some of the words here. So instead of using trauma all the time, we could use some different words. We could say it's a stress test. I could say it's an activating event. I could even say it's conditioning. Now, if the activating event, if you want to call it a trauma, it moves towards, let's say, the word tragedy, because nothing good is going to come from this. Now, some of the synonyms for trauma would be to suffer, shock, stress, strain. I don't even believe that all those are negative, to be honest with you. We can talk about that a little bit later, because who among us doesn't expect a little shock, stress, and strain when they're trying to be a better person? I mean, if you work out, you need that. That's a necessity. If you want to be educated, unless you're going to open up the same book every day and look at the same words that you already know, it's going to be a little bit of a stress and strain when you're trying to learn new material, right? So I don't associate shock, stress, and strain with trauma. I associate it with the other side that I'm going to tell you. So if we have an activating event, we could also call it a chance, an opportunity to triumph. And how do we do that? Well, some of the antonyms to the word trauma, or the opposite of trauma, would be words such as it's a blessing, it's a benefit, it's helpful. Is it? It can be, but you would have to work on it. So again, I'm not so into just immediately saying, here's an event, it has to be traumatic. it becomes a subjective experience, and you can work with it to be better. Now, there are ways to assess an activating event or to help prepare for one so it's not so traumatic. So let's take a look at that. So number one, I would call it reality or being in accordance with nature. Now here's some basics. If you choose to close your eyes to reality, it's going to cause suffering. Now, pain is inevitable in life. That's just what happens. That's what the Buddha would say. Pain is definitely a part of human existence. But the suffering is optional, because if you don't understand nature and you choose not to look at reality, you will suffer needlessly for no reason, because anytime you go against reality or nature, you're going to lose. And you're choosing to lose on purpose. That should not happen. So let's talk about nature. Every mortal thing in this world does the same thing. It's born, it blooms in the way it's supposed to, it declines, and then it dies. That's the way it is. You have to know that. So the question becomes, well, I'll get to the questions later. But I want to say this. If you know that everything in this world is going to leave you and it dies, well, then doesn't it behoove you to be the best person you can be and try to extract as much goodness from this world as you can, including yourself, to reach for your full potential on a daily basis, to try to find as much love and laughter in this world and good relationships? Of course it does. But here's the thing. As you accumulate all of these good relationships and you accumulate skills, these skills are going to decline. That's what age does. And people, they die. One of my clients is 89 years old. We have great conversations about almost all of her friends are gone now. This is life. This is what's going to happen. So we can shoot for pleasure in life. We could shoot for fulfillment. But all these things are going to go, so it's going to cause pain. So there is no pleasure without pain. That's the way it is. The more pleasure you have in life, the more fulfillment you have in life, the more achievement you have in life, the more good things you have going for you, the more things you're going to have to say goodbye to. That's a reality. I don't know if it's a trauma. It could be, but why does it have to be if it's a fact? If it's a fact and you know it, it should take away part of the traumatic experience. It's just part of the cost of doing business as a living thing. Continuing. Again, everything you accumulate is going to leave. You know, as a marriage and family therapist, you know, we've heard this, and I don't care about the numbers. It doesn't matter. It's good enough. But they say about 50% of marriages end in divorce. Let's say that that's true. People go, oh my God, that's such a traumatic experience. You know, divorce. Agreed. That's true. Those marriages ended. And nobody gets into a marriage because they want it to end at some point. There's a lot of hurt there, a lot of expectation, and you know, it's definitely very hurtful. I think most of us know this. However, let's know the fairy tale of they lived happily ever after. Is that true? Because how do the other marriages end? Give you 3 seconds to think about it. All the other marriages end in death. So what's better, a divorce? Or knowing that when you're in front of a person you love and you're saying your vows, or you're in a long-term relationship with somebody that you're committed to, that you know in that moment that no matter what you share, you are going to have to bury your partner someday. Or they're going to have to bury you. That's the fact. But knowing that, should it stop you from having relationships? I would say no, Because as we know, everything's impermanent and everything disappears and everything dies. So if that's true, and it is, it means that if you never try to achieve anything, if you never try to get close to people, the only thing in your life is going to be losses. That's it. You have no chance to win. And I'm not saying, when I say win, I'm not saying you have to be an NFL MVP player of the Super Bowl. I'm not saying you have to win a gold medal in the Olympics. I'm talking about being able to smile sometimes. I'm talking about being able to laugh with somebody. I'm talking about making somebody else smile, being good to somebody else. Those are the little wins that add up, that make life worthwhile. Because there's no separation between pain and pleasure. It's the same thing. The more pain, the more pleasure that somebody had in the beginning. It's the way it is. The love that we have for people is directly correlated to the amount of grief we're going to feel when they're gone. You have to be okay with this. Is this traumatic? I think it's more traumatic to live a life that sucks, where you have no relationships, or you have no skills, or you've never tried to achieve anything. That's much more traumatic. What's traumatic is the things that people don't do. Okay, I think I've said enough about that. So again, let me throw in the question then. If something is natural, if it's normal, if it's essential, if it's a certainty of life, why do we call it traumatic? Can you call it traumatic? You could, but that wouldn't be very healthy, right? So these things that are very normal to life, we have to understand, they can be traumatic for the individual. It's their subjective experience. But if we look at reality and we're in accordance with nature, it's an extremely difficult experience, but it's not traumatic. It's something that you can grow from. Let's continue. Here's a question. Why do so many people completely deny responsibility for their actions and behaviors, but on the flip side, they take full responsibility for the actions of other people? Now, that sounds like a weird question. I'm going to have to explain that a little bit more to make it a little bit more understandable. This is what I'm talking about. Let's talk about some traumatic experiences that could either cause CPTSD or PTSD. We're talking about verbal abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse. Talking about having an alcoholic in your family, or maybe your partner's an alcoholic. Maybe we're talking about bullying in some sense, like a lot of kids get bullied in school these days. What happens from a lot of that? Well, if we're talking about PTSD and trauma today, what we're saying here is that people get stuck, just like we said before. They're stuck. Why are they stuck? They get stuck because they end up living in shame. They live with guilt. They have low self-esteem. They have very negative core beliefs. In other words, they think poorly of themselves, of other people, and in society in general. They have very negative life scripts, such as, oh, this happened to me, I'm a terrible person. I'm a victim, I'm helpless and I'm hopeless. Again, they're going to be stuck when they feel that way. However, let's go over some of the things I just talked about, right? Verbal abuse, sexual abuse, you name it. All the kinds of abuse I mentioned, or somebody in your household being an alcoholic. All of those situations and events are neutral, and they're neutral external events and acts that say absolutely nothing about the character of the victim. But it says everything you want to know about the perpetrator. So if that's true, then why does everybody take responsibility for the other person? That makes no sense. Again, you can choose to be traumatized by a person who verbally abuses you. Or you can look at them and say, wow, that's an angry person. It doesn't do anything to you. You could say, I wish that person was a little more nice and caring and conscious of what they're saying. But they can't hurt you without your permission and without your full agreement. If somebody says to me, listen, I can't stand your haircut, it looks terrible. I say, well, I like it. The only way I could feel offended by what they say is if I agree with them, and I don't. So it means nothing. Let's take a look at, say, someone who has an alcoholic in their family. Let's say a child. You can see an alcoholic or a mother or father come home every day or stay home, and they're drunk every day, 7 days a week. But what does that do? Is that traumatic? Yeah, it could be for a lot of people. However, going with what I said before, let's use different terminology. That's an activating event. The activating event, or conditioning, or a stress test of having somebody in front of you every day that's drunk. Because to me, that's a daily reminder that people who drink really don't know how to handle their emotions and feelings, and they don't fare well in life. So to me, that would be a daily reminder to stay away from alcohol. Me at a very young age, I don't know how old I was in a car, I think with my parents, they were still married, and I saw this drunk person. I didn't know they were drunk, but they were wiggling and wobbling and swaying, and they were trying to get across the street. And my father said, oh, that person is really drunk. And I had to ask, because I was scared. Because to me, they looked like somebody out of a monster movie. They looked like a zombie. It looked like they were possessed. And I was really scared, because I never saw a person act like that. Like my father said, well, that's called drunk. That's when people drink alcohol. So even at that very young age, I was like, oh no, I'm not going to drink alcohol. And to this day, whether somebody wants to judge me or not, I've never been drunk. And it's not because of that day, but I've seen the damage that alcohol does. I don't go, oh wow, look at that person who's an alcoholic. They're ruining their life. Cool, let me do it too. No, it's a daily reminder. It's a stress test to say, they're doing it, let me be better. Let's continue with that, because it could happen in a lot of different ways. Being poor or living in poverty is also a way to cause CPTSD. I saw this on a regular basis. I saw my parents struggle financially every day. Did that make me want to struggle financially every day? No, it was a daily reminder of me that I better start reading a lot of books, and I better start making myself valuable, and I better really pay attention to my education so I can call the shots when I get older. And so I can be valuable, at least financially, to the community in some way, and so I can extract money from a capitalistic country. It was a daily reminder. I saw poor every day. Like, there was no way I was going to look at that and go, cool, that's what I want to do. Yeah, I want to go down to the welfare office again. Yeah, I want to go to the church to see if I can get another thing of peanut butter and white bread. Come on now. Like, is it a traumatic experience? Nah, it was a stress test. It makes you better. It's an activating event. Is that traumatic? It helped me to be better. That's part of the story for today. Really quick, let's talk about bullying. Bullying is this thing where every time you Google it, it's like, oh my God, bullies are terrible. There's one kid who's being bullied, and the way they want to solve it is to take 8 billion people on the planet and make them cordial and nice and not say anything mean to anybody. Instead of taking the individual who is supposedly bullied and make them stronger. Why do you care about other people's opinions? It was just funny, like just this morning I went on Facebook and there was a comment I left on someone on the political thing. Interestingly enough, I did it like 7 weeks ago, but I don't know why it popped up today. Anyway, to make a long story short, I had the number one thing for likes, and I guess that's why I was on the top for top comment. But on the other half of that, I was also the top one for negative comments. All these people were commenting, saying all these negative things about me and all these things. And I smiled. You think it makes a difference? And how do you do that? Listen, bullying is actually, in a sense, it's an activating event. It's not necessarily we assume that it's traumatic. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. When you get older, you're going to have to justify your position in business. When you own a business and you're trying to get clients and you charge people money, there's this word, they call it in school or whatever, these traumatic therapists or whatever, They call it bullying. I call it negotiations. Let me say it again. It's negotiations. Everybody who wants to be somebody in this world has got to negotiate for themselves. You have to know what you stand for. You have to grow a backbone. And in order to do that, you have to really focus down on what you believe and who you are. And if somebody says, you are this, say, thank you for your opinion, but this is what I really am. Like, I wrote a book. I can get some people to say, your book sucks. And I could say, well, thank you for your opinion. A lot of other people like it, but I have equanimity. You know, whether people buy it or not buy it doesn't make me feel like I wrote a good book or a bad book. I did the best book I could, period. Doesn't matter what other people think. It's unnecessary to think like that. As a matter of fact, bullying increases your self-esteem. Yes, I said that. Bullying increases your self-esteem. You want to know why? Because when you stand up for yourself and you have agency and you say, no, that's not the way it is, this is the way it is, and this is how I feel, and this is why I feel this way, and you're allowed to make that boundary, you get self-esteem. Because what happens is you end up getting all these people in therapy that don't know how to build boundaries. They don't know how to stick up for themselves. And that's because maybe somebody in 5th grade said, oh, I don't like your haircut. And everybody goes, oh my God, don't ever say that. Don't criticize somebody, don't say anything negative. You know, I've been in sports all my life. You think I do bodybuilding shows with everybody's families of the other contestants and competitors, they cheer for me? No, they sit in silence or they boo. You know, there was one bodybuilding contest when I won. I won the whole show and I was proud. When it came out in the magazine, the writer said, it was a great show, it was entertaining, but I have to say that the guy who came in 2nd place got ripped off. This guy, Joe Peroni, probably had his mother and father on the judging panel, and there was no way that this guy should have won the show. Listen, I laugh just like I did now. You know, you have to be able to handle the slings and the arrows and the rocks if you want to be a good person in this world. You have to stand up for yourself. That's extremely important. Again, I know this show's going to get long, so let me try to do this real quick. Again, traumatic experience or conditioning. The other day, or let me say I've had a lot of clients like this, 15, 16 years old. I don't like the way I look. I'm too fat, I'm too skinny. Like, great, let's join the gym. There's a gym, look it up, Google it, 2 miles away from the house. Great. First thing, I'm not going to walk 2 miles in the sun. No. Then the mother gets on. Oh, no, there's too many shootings. Like, he can get shot. It's just too traumatic. Hold it. It's too traumatic in the year 2022 to walk down the street to go to the gym. That's where we're going. You know why? Because society's like that, but therapists back it up. Because they don't push people to do things. Right? And if you push somebody to do something to help themselves, as a therapist, your job's in jeopardy. Or it can be. Because people don't want someone who's pushing them to do the work to actually help them. They want somebody to go, oh, poor baby. It's, you know, don't worry. It's okay to be 15 years old and weigh 346 pounds. It's okay. Play more video games. It's all right. You know, smoke marijuana, more of it, because you can't handle the stress of pushing yourself anywhere. Let's talk about conditioning. You know, it's like, okay, so a lot of people know this, but when you box, okay, I box bare knuckle. The reason for that is because I wanted to condition my knuckles. The first couple of weeks you do it, you're bloody. Is that traumatic? No, it's called conditioning. Because now I can punch stone walls all day long and not get cut. It's cool. And on the other side of my hands is the calluses from 35 years or more of working out with weights. So they're tough as nails, both sides of my hands. And it's not any different than anybody else who does this. The problem is that people who are the real movers and shakers in this world, the business people, the athletes, people like this are not therapists. That's where the problem is. Because if you actually had people who achieved things in their life, if they became therapists, you would see therapy done in a whole new way. A whole new way. Like, you walk down the street, right, and someone catcalls you or says something stupid, like, oh my God, it ruined my whole day. It's so It's so traumatic. Really? Have you ever been in front of 3,000 people, all heard them boo you and call you bad names? Like, there's a training ground for these types of things if you try to live a real life. I don't want to overstate this, but I do want to read part of this book. But before I say that, even if you live in a situation where you were younger, where you had to be somewhat codependent in order to survive, as negative and as maybe traumatic as that is, the story is not done. You can take that traumatic experience and turn it into one of the best things you have. Because if you're used to people pleasing, if you're used to trying to meet somebody's needs, if you're used to trying to manage other people's feelings and emotions, and if they feel good that day, guess what? You'll be a really good business person. Why don't you open up a store next to me? That would be awesome. And just like everybody else, I love people who want to meet your needs. When you go to a place to fix your car, I want somebody who meets me at the door and says, hello, Mr. Peroni, and then they do their job. I don't want someone who doesn't want to meet my needs. So yes, codependence or a trauma situation when you're younger can lead to you being a great business person. So let me read you some reality here, because I love this book. This is called The Road Less Traveled. Just in case somebody thinks I'm out of line, I'm going to grab, Dr. Scott Peck, who wrote this book a long time ago before everybody's feelings and emotions were so hurt and you couldn't tell people the truth. He actually came out with a real book with some real truth. And as you can see, I got to hold this book together because it's in pieces, because I've read it so many times over the years. If you only read 3 words of this book, you can stop if you want. So the first 3 words of this book is, life is difficult. I don't think he uses the word traumatic once in this whole book. It's great. But just for fun, let me just, screw it. We're at 32 minutes in. Let me go a little bit longer. So let me read this to you. It's beautiful and it's amazing. Life is difficult. This is a great truth, one of the greatest truths. It is a great truth because once we truly see this truth, we transcend it. Once we truly know that life is difficult, once we truly understand and accept it, then life is no longer difficult or traumatic. I added that part. Because once it's accepted, the fact that life is difficult no longer matters. Interesting. Most do not fully see this truth that life is difficult. Instead, they moan, more or less incessantly, about the enormity of their problems, their burdens, and their difficulties, as if life were generally easy, as if life should be easy. It's not. They voice their belief noisily that their difficulties represent a unique kind of affliction that should not be, and that somehow they've been the stress has been especially visited upon them or their families. Life is a series of problems. Do you want to moan about them, or do you want to solve them? Do we want to teach our children to solve them? And I'll add this. Or do we want to do what we've been doing for a while and teach people that life is traumatic and that everybody's a victim? Listen, again, one more time. The traumatization of a person is their subjective experience of the situation. Therefore, it can be treated after the activating event, and can also be treated before activating events. They can be inoculated against thinking that everything is stressful. Like walking a couple of miles to the gym is too stressful. My name is Joe Peroni. This is the Rise Above Project. I hope you found this valuable. Please subscribe and tell a friend. Thank you.